Hello guys, it is Chapter 12, Part 2, Compensating a Flexible Workforce. So let's just start with where we are right now, right? With the COVID-19 situation has been a very big challenge for a lot of companies, and not just small companies, but a lot of these really large $1 billion in revenue companies didn't have a plan for going remote, and they weren't really prepared to support these employees who were going to be working remotely. Some people might have had some plans, right? So they could have some folks that were telecommuting, but others weren't. But they certainly didn't have the overall infrastructure and support to manage all of their employees going remotely. All right, so back to the chapter. So leased employees, not leased, but leased employees. And what does that mean? So we actually have a perfect example on our campus. The Aramark folks that will serve you food, if you go to certain places on campus, are leased employees. And what that means is that the university has contracted with Aramark. Okay, so Aramark is the employer of these people, and the university employs Aramark, but that contract is multi-year contract. Okay, so it is much more long-term than a temporary agency, which is really, you'll have a temporary employee for just usually a couple of months. Okay, now let's talk about independent contractors. Independent contractors are often also known as consultants, and they tend to have very specialized skills that might be in short supply in the market and can be done really on a project basis. So you have a lot of folks in art and design, your graphic designers, IT, some form of specialized, web design or things like that. You might have construction. You want somebody to put a deck in for you, or again, media and communication, transportation, right? So you've got Uber and Lyft and these other types of organizations. So there's just a lot of different avenues to become an independent contractor. There has been a lot of conversation between what is the difference, legally speaking, between an independent contractor and an employee, all right? Because there is so much difference that we'll go into in a little while in terms of how they get treated. So under the common law test, all right, here over on the left-hand side, there are many different things that the courts look at, and it is determined by the Internal Revenue Code, and it really focuses on that right to control. Over on the right talks about the economics realities test, and that is more based in the Fair Labor Standards Act, and that particular test focuses more on if this employee or this independent contractor is financially dependent upon the organization. So do they really only work for this one organization, or do they work for several organizations? All right. And you can look at these tables in your book on page 306 and 305. And I want you to pause it here, and I want you to draw an arrow from the different, so you can compare and contrast these two different tests. So here we have the right to control. Well, obviously that matches to the right to control over here. And the way that supervision is described in table 12-6 just says employer supervises the worker. The work is done, or the work is done without supervision if it's an independent contractor. If you look under the right to control in table 12-7, a person is an employee if management retains a certain type and degree of control over the work, which would imply supervision. So I want you to pause it here, and I want you to take these arrows and determine what on this side maps to what on this side. So here's what I have. Here's the way that I have mapped it. So you can take a picture of this, but again, just I want you to really focus on the common law test is about right to control, economics reality test is more about being financially dependent. Okay? Then there's another test called the ABC test, and this is in California. Okay? So it was effective at the first of this year. And if a person is an independent contractor, they must meet all three of these following factors. So if we look at the common law test and the economics realities test, the courts are really kind of looking at the preponderance of the evidence. They're not saying that you have to have every single one of these things. The ABC test says you do. It's a very stringent test. So the first one is that you have to be free from the control and direction, right? The right to control the work. So an independent contractor must be able to control his or her own work. When it's done, where it's done, how it's done. All right. 2, the work performed is these tasks that are performed are outside of the usual business of the employer. And then the third thing is basically that this particular individual has their own independent work, and they work for several different companies, not just one company. All right, so here we've got Microsoft, Uber, Lyft, Grubhub. There are many others that have been sued. That's the commonality, because these people are being classified as independent contractors. However, they're being treated like employees. And so these employees, without the benefit of being an employee, have sued these large organizations. Now, in New Jersey, November of 19, in New Jersey, they actually have fined Uber $649 million. Why? Because they're saying, hey, Uber, you're really an employer of employees, not independent contractors, and you haven't paid unemployment and disability insurance in our state. So we're asking, they want to make sure that Uber is paying them. In March of 2019, Uber settled this long-running battle, and it's in California and Massachusetts. But they settled, and they paid $20 million to these drivers, but they did not change the status. These people are still independent contractors. Those drivers are still independent contractors and not employees. So, and then Uber said that it would change some of its working style so that it was much more about being an independent contractor than having that right to control exactly how workers behave. They're going to be more transparent, published policies, appeals process, more training. Okay? All right, so at the beginning of the chapter, we talked about how there's a lot of personal preference for people choosing to be in the contingent workforce. And there are many advantages to that. However, there are some downsides as well. So the first thing is inconsistency. The economy is unstable. Well, we're seeing that right now. Even if you're an employee, it's unstable. But if you rely on contract work, if you're in that gig economy, it's a lot more difficult. It is a very competitive marketplace, and you often are managed by an algorithm, especially those drivers, Uber and Lyft drivers. Where they go, how much money they're making is based off of an algorithm. So it's not just how hard you're working, but you have to be able to figure out what that algorithm is, and it's very difficult to do that. Social isolation. Again, people are experiencing that now, working from home. Not everybody likes staying in their home and working. It's difficult whenever you don't have an opportunity to interact with others. Technological dependence and difficulties. Again, I'm sure that some of you have experienced this recently. The internet's not always up, or it's spotty, and you have trouble watching these videos or other things. Risk of overwork and exhaustion. People actually work more when they work from home. It's difficult to separate work from life. You're not getting in the car and going home. So there's really can be a lot more difficult. Lack of regulations. I have more on that on the next slide. And support systems. Okay, and then I'm going to ask you to watch this video because it's really, really good, talking about the pros and cons of gig work. So what are some of the more difficult aspects to it? Independent contractors, the federal law, the minimum wage laws don't apply. So there's no minimum wage, there's no overtime. It's also not required to have health insurance. They don't have to have regularly scheduled breaks. There's no collective bargaining, no union that's going to support you in this. And then you also are responsible for tracking and paying your own taxes. You're not necessarily entitled to any kind of unemployment or workers' compensation, except for during COVID-19 when these gig workers actually can get unemployment. But unless you're paying into those yourself, generally speaking, under normal circumstances, you don't have that benefit. Federal discrimination laws don't apply to independent contractors. So that means, yes, sexual harassment, wage discrimination, you have no protections there. So again, a lot of companies are being sued by these independent contractors / employees to say we're not independent contractors, we are employees, right? So how do you avoid this litigation? Let's just classify everybody as an employee. You, as the employer, you have certainty in that. You know that these employees work for you. You know exactly what their status is. You are not going to be engaged in some form of a misclassification lawsuit. You actually know you do have control over the work. You have that right to control how they're working. And so your quality may actually increase. Potential workforce reduction seems counterintuitive, but it's true. And you can also improve your brand image by attracting the very best workers because people are more secure in their roles. All right, so we're going to end it there and continue on in the next one.